Hello, everyone. Let's talk about Chapter 20 of No Man Knows My History in the Quiver of the Almighty. I really enjoy this cheeky little intro that the journalists are picking up on the success of Nauvoo, and they say, we'll let the prophets do what they want. They seem like good enough people. All we ask in return for our reports is a good, cool seat, bench, or location when the end of the world comes and the everlasting bonfire begins. That is so clever, so funny, and I love that that doesn't sound like language from the 19th century, or at least the discourse that we've been reading throughout this book. That's like some Mark Twain 19th century energy. It's really funny, super biting. It says everything that these people really believed about Nauvoo. I thought it was interesting. Can't remember which chapter it was, if we've already discussed it or not, but Joseph Smith was a subscriber to the New York Herald. He read it. He read every thing. Well, why? He left New York to form the church and to grow the church in Kirtland and Far West, Independence, and then Nauvoo. Why is he so interested in New York still? I think the answer to that is I think everyone is curious about their home, although I probably can't tell you the last time I read the Omaha World Herald. But, as it were, Joseph Smith, I think my thesis is that Joseph Smith was interested in the secular affairs of the world. There's that letter that he wrote to Emma when he was in New York City, and he says something of the effect that, even though as grand as the city is, it still pales in comparison to the gospel, basically. But somehow I don't really believe that. I think Joseph really loved the grandeur of human civilization and appreciated the fact that he was getting this unprecedented opportunity in Nauvoo to build a kingdom that would surpass New York, that would surpass Virginia, that would surpass London, that would take over the entire world. And so it's very interesting, and we get a taste of his growing ambition when he talks about the failure of governments throughout time. I think this is a very interesting question that's brought up in the inference. If you read between the lines, what he's basically asking, the question is, why have all of these governments failed? Why has every republic, why has every political organization man has ever attempted failed? And why are the only things that we remember from history dusty monuments of yesteryear? This is a really great and insightful thing for us to ponder over, and I don't have any specific answer. Joseph Smith's answer, of course, is that the reason that all of these governments have failed up to this point in human history is that none of them have been led by a prophet of God consistently long enough to be delivered from Satan's grasp and long enough for them to build the city of God. So Joseph says that the ideal government is a theocracy, a government by a prophet specially chosen to administer the laws of God. So Joseph believes that in him can be found the one true source of leadership through which the millennium of Jesus Christ will be ushered. Very interesting. You get a sense for his absolutely gigantic ego and ambition. Not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but it is interesting to get a sense for the scale. I have never once in my life had a thought that I personally was capable of creating the most advanced and peaceful society known to man. That has never come across my mind, and I think I'm a pretty ambitious person when push comes to shove. So the Mormons make an incredibly politically daft move. Really, Joseph Smith, not the Mormons themselves, but when you're the prophet of God and you speak for the people, I guess it comes down to you. Joseph writes in the Times and Seasons that Stephen Douglas, a Democrat, is a master spirit and his friends are our friends. Basically, we are going to vote as a bloc. We are aware that divide and conquer is the watchword with many, but with us it cannot be done. We love liberty too well. We have suffered too much to be easily duped. And so immediately the press on all sides lambasts the Mormons for their anti-democratic feelings. The Mormon Church has an official policy in the handbook today stating that it is not the business of the church to it is not the business of local or general church leaders to influence the democratic electoral process. And while that is in the handbook, I know of several anecdotal experiences where politics absolutely make their way to the pulpit. And nowhere is this more evident than in Nauvoo, when they are openly stating in their own newspapers that they have every intention to vote as a bloc, which, regardless of how you think about it, the reaction at the time was that everyone was very, this is something that was very concerning to people, because, well, what's to stop them, if they're going to vote in a bloc in Illinois, what's to stop them from voting as from growing until they can vote as a bloc to take over the United States? So it's a concern for a lot of people. Yeah, this is an interesting, that Fawn Brodie brings up that in Kirtland, it was a pretty quiet era of growth. There was a lot of church growth, but there wasn't a whole lot of entertainment or buzz. But in Nauvoo, it says there were many days when the prophet gave himself over to completely to the pleasures of the average man, attending the tent theaters that came to the city, frequenting band concerts and lectures on phrenology, etc. So that's really interesting. This prophet is an actual man. We talked at length about this in previous commentaries, so I guess I won't go too much further. But one thing that I actually really appreciate about Joseph Smith is his casual candor. He's a man of the earth, and that actually tracks with me and resonates with me way more than the current leadership of the Mormon Church. You will see them at BYU football games or Utah Jazz games. Plenty of church leaders have been huge supporters of the arts. I have performed in public performances of choral and operatic music in which high-ranking general authorities were in the audience. So I think that is really cool, but my intuition is that these quorum of the 15 apostles and the first presidency and the 12 apostles, when they get up in general conference, they often tell stories about football or baseball or macho man sort of, we are men of the world, trying to relate to the common man. That's not really true. Gary Stevenson, one of the apostles, is literally one of the richest men in the United States, and has, I believe, I don't want to say something that's not true, but if I understand correctly, he's been able to continue profiting off of his business ventures as an apostle, or at least as part of becoming an apostle, he has been wrapping up those business ventures, which have earned his family hundreds of millions of dollars. And so these men are not normal average men. And one thing that you can appreciate about Joseph Smith, even if you absolutely despise everything that he did and everything that he stands for, is that Joseph Smith was pretty much truly a man of the people. Obviously had a really high intellect, but was pretty, like I said, an average man. Just enjoyed life for what it's worth. And he violated the word of wisdom frequently throughout his entire adult life. People report, tattletale, hey, some of your brethren have been drinking whiskey. And he says, what's the problem with that? And he gave them money to go get more whiskey. And he's presented a bottle of wine from a convert, and he drank it because it was a really good bottle of wine. I think modern Mormons could learn from this example. All things in moderation. All things in moderation. It's so simple, and yet today, drinking a cup of coffee can render you ineligible to go to the temple, and thus would lead you to sacrifice your eternal consequences in the life hereafter because you drank coffee or tea. Whereas the prophet Joseph Smith is lightheartedly chiding people for tattletaling about drinking whiskey and giving the people money to go buy more liquor. Come on, people just don't know these things. That's why I think this project is so valuable. I hope active Mormons will listen to this audiobook that I've done and find something they resonate with my commentary. I think almost all people that have listened to this, and at least from the comments I've gotten, it's obviously been people who have left the church or who are casually interested, but I don't think I've heard any comments from active listeners. So if you're an active Mormon and you are learning something from these commentaries and chapter readings, I'd love to hear from you, because I think Joseph Smith is so interesting. And there's so many redeeming qualities amidst all of the things that I think are genuine criticisms of the man, both as a man and as a prophet. There's lots of really interesting things and good things to say. So here we get the famous, I don't know if this is the first or the most important instance of this saying, but when Joseph Smith is exposed by Henry Caswell, this Episcopalian preacher from St. Louis, he comes and tricks Joseph into saying something's Greek when it's not Greek. It's all Greek to me. He basically gets clowned on for not knowing his grammar. And so, of course, the famous line comes, Mr. Smith speaks as a prophet and sometimes as a mere man. If he gave a wrong opinion respecting the book, he spoke as a mere man. So not this exact quote, but the sentiment of this quote. Sometimes prophets speak as prophets, and sometimes they speak as men. It's one of the most important theological statements in Mormonism. It is one of the most said anytime any problematic aspect of a prophet's life or statements comes to light. The number one apologetic response is, Brigham Young was speaking as a man when he taught about blood atonement or Adam God theory. He was speaking as a man, not a prophet. But when Joseph Smith teaches about how we can go and populate future world or some beautiful doctrine, that they'll give him all the credit. But as soon as he says something silly or gets caught with the Kinderhook plates that we read about, then suddenly, he's just a man. A prophet is a prophet only when he is acting as such, which is kind of a corollary to that. So there's this admission that prophets, at the end of the day, are human. The Old Testament, the Book of Mormon, all of the prophets throughout history are just men trying their best. And so that's another apologetic you'll get, is like, give Brother Joseph a break. So what if he incorrectly translated the Kinderhook plates, which were a complete and abject fraud? Who cares? At the end of the day, he's a good guy, and if he did say a few things that were a bit silly, I think we can all just take him for his word or give him the benefit of the doubt. It's stuff like that. I do think it's interesting about the Kinderhook plates, which are certainly not as big of a fraud or a big of a smoking gun. And if I were to try to prove Mormonism untrue, I probably wouldn't lead with the Kinderhook plates. I think it's more of an amusing side piece, but I do think it's revealing that the Times and Seasons, it says, published full reproductions as further proof of the authenticity of the Book of Mormon, and the printing office sold facsimiles at $1 a dozen. So they are profiting off of the printing of facsimiles of the translation that Joseph is said to have made of the Kinderhook plates, that people genuinely believed was a proof of the authenticity of Joseph Smith's prophetic calling, etc. It says that he discovered it to be a history of the person whose bones lay in the mound, a descendant of Ham through the loins of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. What more can you say? It's just not, literally he got caught in a fraud, and they were selling facsimiles of the translation and the Kinderhook plate imagery, and people bought it, and people literally and figuratively bought it. They believed that it was authentic. Oh man, I cringed so hard when I had to read that paragraph of Joseph speaking all the different languages. I'm not even really sure what that was supposed to accomplish, but it was funny. Were I a Chaldean, I would exclaim, Kidna Tamarun Laum. I can't even. It was fun for me to read that because it just sounds like total gobbledygook. Why? I don't understand why that paragraph. Like, why does it exist? Joseph is, you can see, like, this dude has a mind. He's got big brain. He's got Joe Rogan energy. This dude thinks that he is just like on a different planet. If you've ever taken psychoactive substances, sometimes you get into that zone where you feel as though revelations are pouring onto you. And I think there are some people that support the hypothesis that Joseph Smith definitely had access to and used psychoactive substances from his early days as a youth into his prophetic years in Kirtland and elsewhere. I need to do more research so I can say with more accuracy specifically those statements. But that I have heard that Joseph Smith and the early Mormons did dabble with psychoactive substances. But you can definitely get a sense for how just massively inflated his ego is becoming, and you can't blame him to a certain extent because Nauvoo is booming. It's a boom town. He successfully got his saints, the ones that survived Hans Mill and Far West and Independence. They got out of Missouri. He's already once escaped basically a governor-sanctioned kidnapping to extradite into Missouri, and his town is exploding and is prosperous and is making waves in local politics. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess. And if you'll remember, he thinks he's the only prophet capable of creating the most advanced and peaceful civilization in human history. So, interesting. Let's see here. This is so interesting that he has this Nauvoo museum. So he's so genial. He's so charming that when, there's not tour guides, there's no missionaries at the port. It's Joseph Smith himself welcoming people into the town. This is probably a regular weekly occurrence. And he shows them the papyri and the mummies. He says, look at this papyri. That is the handwriting of Abraham, father of the faithful. This is the autograph of Moses, and these lines were written by his brother Aaron. Here we have the earliest accounts of the creation, from which Moses composed the first book of Genesis. So, if you know anything about the Book of Abraham, one of the compelling theories that is taking place in Mormon apologetics in the 21st century is what's known as the catalyst theory, which I'm going to explain it poorly because I'm not an expert in this area. But basically, they believe that, they concede that the Book of Abraham is like, what Joseph translated was literally not what was on the papyri, basically at all, but that the papyri were simply a spiritually fulfilling series of documents which in Joseph's hands became the catalyst for great and beautiful revelations on the discourse of heaven and the nature of God and our potential to become like God. So you can preserve all of the theological beauty of Joseph's Book of Abraham while conceding that, basically he didn't get a single thing right in the translation. The problem with that theory is that in order to come up with that, you'd have to still answer for the fact that Joseph Smith was openly displaying these artifices in a museum in Nauvoo, telling people himself that, this is written by Abraham. This is literally an autograph of Moses. Can you imagine if we had an autograph from Moses, prophet of the Old Testament, the one of the most important prophets of all religious history? Can you imagine if we had a verified autograph? Maybe we do. I don't know. I guess that betrays my ignorance of Judaism. But if we did have one, that is truly a remarkable thing. So Joseph Smith is not mincing words. He's saying we have the goods, right? The most satisfying thing that I could say about Joseph Smith is just to re-quote Quincy. Who is Quincy? What is his name? Josiah Quincy. Josiah Quincy visits Nauvoo. He's one of the people that gets to see these papyri and mummies and stuff. And so this is what he says about Joseph Smith. And I basically can't state it better myself. I cannot help him out of the difficulty. I myself stand helpless before the puzzle. And sorry, I cut that quote in half. The full quote is, if the reader does not know just what to make of Joseph Smith, I cannot help him out of the difficulty. I myself stand helpless before the puzzle. That's kind of how I've been feeling as I've read this book. Obviously, I weigh much more heavily on the side of Joseph's faults, which are egregious and multifaceted. But a puzzle. Joseph Smith is a puzzle. That is the best, most succinct thing you can say, is that the man is absolutely fascinating. It's very clear from Fawn Brodie's absolutely amazing writing that she was absolutely under the spell, not of Joseph himself, but of the history and the narrative. My goodness, can you imagine how exciting it must have been for her to pore over these documents and write this book? This book changed the course of her life. It became a bestseller. It was the writing of this book, the process of that was one of the main things that led to her high-profile excommunication from the Mormon Church. Of course, if you know anything about Mormon history in the 20th century, you'll know that Fawn Brodie is actually the niece of the Mormon prophet David O. McKay. McKay is Fawn Brodie's, I believe when this book was published, it was originally published under the name Fawn McKay Brodie. I could be wrong about that. But David O. McKay had some nasty things to say about his niece, because basically this is the first major biography of Joseph Smith written in the 20th century in that era's most contemporary and modern scholastic rigor, written by a woman, and it's critical of Joseph Smith. Not only is it critical of Joseph Smith, but it's just telling the truth. It's just organizing primary documents into a cohesive, well-written narrative, and Fawn Brodie brings a lot of stink on the church because this book is amazing. This narrative, this story sells itself. It's so fun to read and so engaging, and like the amount of things I've been able to say about it astounds even myself. I'm sorry I'm a bit long-winded, but so this book, obviously, if you knew nothing else about the Mormon Church and you read this book, you would come to a very different conclusion about the nature of Mormonism than perhaps the Salt Lake leadership would like you. They certainly, if you compare this story about Joseph Smith to the story that new converts are taught as they take the missionary lessons, there are a variety of discrepancies. So, this book is awesome because it helps us figure out for ourselves a little bit more about the puzzle of Joseph Smith. I love that it says that the people of Nauvoo, most of them, there were people that were disgruntled about Joseph being a man of the people and sometimes being a bit lighthearted. But most people loved him as a man and as a prophet. It says they were as elated when he won a wrestling match as they were awed when he dictated a new revelation. These people loved Joseph Smith, for sure. And it says, because he took Christian theology and ethics and mixed them with business, politics, and empire building, his people came to do the same. The result was that Mormonism became not only a belief, but also a way of life. This is so true. Fawn Brodie is so amazing. That is such a succinct way to state that. Mormonism is absolutely a way of life. It has taken all of the values of the American brand of capitalism and eternal growth and progression that are at the core of what it means to be an American, or at least I don't identify with that brand of American nationalism, but for the people who do, Joseph Smith took all of that and basically wed it together with Christian theology, and the result is modern-day Mormonism. Utah is such an interesting place. It's definitely a theocracy, and it is in many ways, the church is absolutely an empire, and they are participating in many of the same acts of neo-colonialism that China and America are being so criticized for. China is spending billions of dollars building infrastructure projects in Africa, so that they can earn allies in the developing world as China begins to seriously take on America as the world's most powerful country. And the Mormon Church is contributing, not to China necessarily, but in the same way that China is helping Africa, not because they want to help Africa, but because they want allies. The Mormon Church is sending missionaries to Africa, teaching them to convert to Mormonism, sending their kids to BYU and things like that, so that they can they are participants in modern day colonialism, and that's a huge problem. So Mormonism is an empire for sure. I love this quote with Joseph Smith. Fawn Brodie does such a great job on this last two paragraphs. She puts two she puts two quotes side by side. I'm only going to read the candid one. So there's the quote of him being the polished shaft in the quiver of the Almighty, all these eloquent words. But I love this. He says, "I do not think there have been very many good men on this earth since the days of Adam, but there was one good man, and his name was Jesus. I do not want you to think that I am very righteous, for I am not." Like, that's a kind of religious leader that I think resonates with people. I think that's the Joseph Smith that my parents love. That's the Joseph Smith that I loved when I was a member of the church. That's the Joseph Smith that I think most people want him to know. But we have to go back to the fact that he's a puzzle, right? And there's more to it. And then the next paragraph talks about how, again, he's back to this egomaniacal statements of, I am the leader, I will be the most important man since Jesus. And he really believes at this point in time, due to Nauvoo's success, that I'm the man. And so very, very frustrating, a puzzle indeed, but so much more interesting than the frustration. I'm willing to take the frustration because the puzzle is so satisfying. If you like Rubik's Cubes or Sudoku or crossword puzzles, Joseph Smith is the greatest puzzle ever. I've never encountered a human being with such a variety of different attitudes that I have about them, and that change with every time that I study. So that's all, and we'll see you. The next chapter is about polygamy in Nauvoo, so we're getting into some really good stuff as we heat up to the eventual demise of the prophet Joseph Smith. See ya.